My name is John Watson. I'm a first-year MBA student, and I'm delighted to be here to present the Serving the Sports Fan with Analytics panel. We're joined today by a wonderful group of people. We've got Pablo Torre, who will be moderating. We've got Alok Patani with ESPN. We got Neil Greenberg with the Washington Post, Nate Silver, 538, and Sharon Katz, also with ESPN. The the panel will run for 45 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. If you do want to ask a question, we ask that you tweet out using the hashtag #ServingTheSportsFan, and we'll be collecting those and then beaming them up to the panel. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pablo, and let's get it going.
Thank you. Thank you. Microphone is activated. Awesome. PowerPoint is a tool that exists that may also be activated. Thank you for coming to this. This is awesome turnout for a discussion that I think is important to periodically have, and you guys are probably very well equipped to have that conversation. But there's a defining of terms when it comes to any argument that I think is essential to clarify, because we don't really know what we're arguing about otherwise. So we'll get into some of the definitions and general understanding and more micro issues within what analytics is. But I wanted to begin by saying, is Jeff Van Gundy here? I heard what you said, Jeff. Keep my name out your mouth. That's how I begin every panel at Sloan, so that's not even unique to this year. Okay, so we have a PowerPoint.
That could be the first time a nerd has picked a fight with a jock, I think. That's a first.
How dare you call me a nerd?
I'm sorry.
Of course. Yes.
It's loving.
It's prison rules in Sloan this year. I'm going to press this button and assume a PowerPoint is going to begin. Yes, that is a title card. So I think we should begin our conversation with a little prelude from a man who I think we all can regard as the patron saint of analytics. Timing. There you go. And I'm going to press this button again and assume, with my nerd mastery of technology, that it's going to activate. Oh man, Charles Barkley on mute. No one wants that version of Charles Barkley.
I can reenact it. It's blah, 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 nerd stink, blah, blah, blah.
This is the universe conspiring to have me unleash my Charles Barkley impression in front of the convention center, but that's probably not a great idea. This is an ironic thing to happen, and Jeff is going to beat me up later.
He basically summarized it by saying, they're just stats.
Yeah, it's fancy math, right? Charles
They're
Barkley
just
is
stats.
telling America analytics are fancy math, and this is a way for
us to charge more.
Yes, so there's a financial imperative that Charles Barkley is imputing to all of us. I feel like I'm preaching all of us. So yeah, let's get into a little bit about what analytics actually are, right? Because there are these. So we're going to have some slides, and we can discuss whether these things are actually analytics, right? So here, we have this chart that the internet loves to yell at people who post this chart about. Kobe Bryant in clutch situations. Does this count as analytics? And I open it up to the panel. Is that an analytic piece of information?
So I'll start, because I'm biased, because I created the chart. So,
do not reveal the puppet strings on this panel, Alec.
So this was a question that was posed to me several times over the course of years. And, is Kobe Bryant clutch? Is he as clutch as Michael Jordan? Various versions of that. So the Kobe Bryant information that was there is not that hard to find, given the play-by-play data that exists now, and same with LeBron James, who you saw on there. The Michael Jordan stuff was hard. It required going through newspaper articles and doing a bunch of manual research. So, yeah, I think it's good. Yeah, obviously I'm biased there. But I actually think that's not analytics. I think that's counting.
Agree, disagree, is that?
I agree. I mean, it's a split. How's that any different than football, last 5 minutes of the game, trailing by 7? I don't think we generally categorize that as analytics. a lot of people think there's this myth that he's super clutch. A lot of people in this audience can probably remember the 7 shots that he made on that screen, but when it comes down to it, like Alex said, it's a split, it's a stat. I would go not analytics.
I mean, it's data, right? And data is one of the ingredients of analysis or analytics. I'm not as concerned about the terms per se as are you testing a hypothesis? That's at the core to me of the analytic or the scientific, of course, method. You know, the question, first of all, does clutch play matter? Is there such thing as a clutch NBA player? I think the answer is probably yes, but you wouldn't glean that much from that data alone. You can ask questions like, is that a statistically significant sample? Are we adjusting for other factors? Maybe Kobe, no one else on his team can take shots. I think it's not really a good excuse, but you could, you know, you want a little bit more context potentially, but that's one of many arguments you'd have to put together in this, I think, fairly important question about scoring under pressure in the NBA.
Yeah, I agree. It's not analytics, and like Nate said, it's the building block, right? That's your starting point. And I think probably the biggest misconception is if a number has a decimal point or a percentage, then automatically it's analytics, right? But it's not that easy. There's so much more that goes into it. But it's a great chart, right? I mean, that's one of the best charts I've seen in quite a while.
Thank you.
Definitely the best one at this. Definitely the best chart at this panel so far.
So far, best one.
I mean, it's better than asserting without evidence that Kobe is a great clutch scorer, right?
Just my personal rankings or something, that would be worse.
Yeah, and going from no evidence to some evidence is like a pretty big leap, and something that a lot of sports argument, most political argument, there's like no compulsion to actually prove what you're saying. I'm not being snarky, like this is literally true. So at least having some data is a big step forward, but it's far short of proof of anything, I think.
So the scientific method, the existence of a hypothesis seems to be the litmus test. Does it have some theory that it's trying to verify?
And that's what people don't get, is like good analysis is about asking questions and questioning assumptions and, you know, being wrong sometimes too, but we really are trying to answer sports questions, and I think that's different from when I was a kid. There were lots of kind of stats that were more factoids. It's like, oh, so-and-so is hitting 345 with runners on second and third and in night games in Dodger Stadium and stuff like that. So you have sample size questions, but also those are more trivia. And I think kind of moving away from trivia toward analysis is the whole game plan here.
Yeah, I think that's like the gateway drug to analytics. Drugs are bad, but that's...
Decimal points are the gateway
but
drug
right,
to
if
analytics.
you take one thing away from this, that's the takeaway. But that's where it starts, right? You see something that's interesting, or you see a number, or you see some sort of stat that's interesting, and then you want to figure out, well, why is that happening, or why do people think that happens? And then the analytics part is bringing in everything else, right? Other voices, video, other data sets, all those good things that come into it. And then you're on the path to analytics, because then you're starting to figure out, why is this happening, or is this really even happening? Like Nate said, sometimes it's a sample size issue. There's a lot of other factors. So getting at that why is where the real high is, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. All right, next slide, we'll run through these because we got theoretical, which I love. But all right, so this chart about Bryce Harper's salary versus his value in war. Analytics or not
Who made
analytics?
that? Me? Oh, this is the best chart we've seen all day.
Yeah.
Yes, no?
Oh, that's mine? So, I mean, that's just a nice picture, but I don't even think that's analytics necessarily. It's just a bunch of the stuff we saw before in a chart, right? I mean, it just shows that Harper is giving the Nats a tremendous amount of value, and there's a lot of reasons why, right? I would say the reasons why that chart looks the way it does and the disparity between the value that he's providing versus what they pay him is where you can find analytics, or just use some common sense, right? He's a young player and he's under team control, so there really doesn't necessarily even need to be any analytics that go into it. It's just that's how baseball is structured, so the Nats are benefiting from that, and then you can see by how much. And it allows them to do other things with that money that should ultimately make them a better baseball team.
I think there's analytics that went into the calculations of that. What should his value be and what is his value? And I think that
Well, that's an
is there.
interesting philosophical distinction. You're saying that you can use analytics to arrive at
Right.
at a piece of data
Right.
or representation of data that is itself not analytics.
Yeah, I think it's more process than result. There's
It's a
tons
very
of,
analytical thing of you to say.
yeah.
Well, I thank you for it.
Yeah, in fact, Jeff Van Gundy was criticizing that too earlier. But yeah, the idea I think is analytics is a set of tools that will allow you to answer those questions that Nate is talking about, to provide some evidence, and then the end result. Some people think analytics or not, but I think the core is in that middle portion.
I mean, it's almost like between the first 2 slides, we skipped over the analytics part, right? The first is kind of raw, unrefined data. And by the way, there is a lot to be said for raw accounting stats that hasn't been processed, because the assumptions are either non-existent or transparent, and that's good. Here, the analysis comes in figuring out, first of all, how you quantify on-field value for a baseball player, then how do you translate that into a market value or a salary, and those are both really tricky questions. You know, to me, this is kind of a piece of storytelling, though, where it's like, it's so disproportionate. And to some extent, whether it's 100, can't read that, but 145 million or 120 million or 80 million or within range, it doesn't matter that much, because it's like, this is where you create value in baseball. Bryce Harper is enormously valuable to the Nationals, would survive any reasonable change in assumptions about what the error bar is on that. And so to me, that's a piece of storytelling, really.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through this now and we're saying analytics or not analytics. I don't think there's a right answer, and I actually think it's more of a spectrum. So it starts with the counting stats you talked about, Nate, and then it gets deeper and deeper until the most advanced analytics you can get. And with this one, I think it's a little bit further than the Kobe one on the spectrum, just because of the back-end analysis, how you calculated the value, and that kind of thing.
So would you say that the calculation of war is itself more analytical? And this is, again, we're dealing with vocabulary because I think this is what ends up getting like debated on TV, right? Like Charles Barkley is going to say something about this stat, and he's going to use it to indict an entire movement, and we should be kind of clear about what we want to take responsibility for. The royal we, meaning everybody in this room, I guess. All right, we're getting closer to, I think, to really specifying. We have another quick thing. Slide press, yeah. So the player tracking data, right, which is kind of the thing now, increasingly. So what is the analytical spectrum position on this?
I mean, it's cool. It's cool to see how fast they're running. It's not a statistic. It's just a number. What does it really tell you, though? It's not, this stat in particular, it's not exactly predictive. Say they're running real fast. What are they doing with that speed? Are they converting the speed to power? Is it a linebacker running to make a tackle on the sideline? Did he even make the tackle? There's a lot of really cool stuff we can do with this player tracking stuff, and the panel upstairs right now is talking about it. So I think we can dig a lot deeper with this player tracking rather than just speed, miles run in soccer, and that kind of thing.
This gets indicted a lot. Why do I care how fast my football player
Stan
ran?
Van Gundy 2 years ago made fun of me because I wrote an article about Paul George and how many miles he'd run on the court. Not that the Van Gundy brothers are targeting me.
I think they might be.
In any sense.
Or that you're bitter in any way.
That's right.
But
Well,
it gets criticized.
Yeah,
but
people
it's
don't
not,
think that it's a
that's-
meaningful thing.
Yeah, that is interesting, like Sharon said, but it's not, in and of itself, it doesn't tell you anything about football necessarily or basketball. So that's where I think, the data, when used properly, can do wonders, but that's where the analytics comes in. That is just measuring how fast they ran. It's not track.
I mean, the question is, if you have this data, could you, this is a very kind of mechanical way to put it, right? But would this data help inform a projection model of how well a guy's going to do? I haven't built a baseball projection system in 10 years or something. From what I understand, though, having velocity data is pretty helpful. Even if you have ERA, that data is pretty noisy and so forth. And so to know how hard a guy is throwing, or bat speed now with hit effects is pretty useful. But some of it's also trivia or can be counterintuitive. Some of the best soccer players in this tracking data actually move less because they're, number one, preserving their energy, and number two, they kind of understand the chess field of the pitch, and they're knowing where they should be to begin with, right? And so, you know, look, this is useful data, and I think to some extent, what we used to call stat heads, analysts now, are maybe a little bit behind the curve and still looking only at the box score stats, when some of this will be extremely useful and some will be spurious. But still, it's ingredients, and they may be useful or useless ingredients.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differentiators for me is, am I seeing a data point in context, right? I mean, a data point is great, like we're talking about here with speed, but you know, if someone just tells you that I run 10 miles an hour, is that good or bad? Or you really don't know. And then you start to look at, well, what position does that player play, and what's the average of that position, and so forth. And that, to me, is really where you start to get into the analytical part of the data.
But is that a criticism of the quality of the data or of its analyticalness?
I think that's just where you got to go, right? I mean, if someone tells you a stat about a player, then it's very difficult to know right off the bat if that's good or bad, right? I mean, you really need a lot of context that goes around, and that's true for any sport, that's true for any position, that's true for almost anything, right? Not just sports, right, but also politics, or even at the grocery store. If a certain item is $1 per pound, you don't necessarily know if that's good or bad unless you know the context behind it. So, you know, that for me has always been the start of analytics. Or if I'm creating a piece of content and my editors will say, hey, I came across this data point, well, then it's up to me to start to put that in context and start to develop a story around it. And that's where for me, that's where the analytics part comes into play.
All right, so we're 0 for 3. Let's do. This is going to be a video.
Come on,
and
analytics.
I don't know
Come
if
on,
the
analytics.
sound system has been fixed in the 20 minutes.
Let's find out.
Let's find out.
That's gone.
And ESPN debuted the BPI a few seasons ago. There are all these different metrics to sort of look at things. How do you want to measure them? RPI, KenPom, etc. And here's what you got from the BPI seeds. The 1 seeds would be North Carolina, Oklahoma, Villanova, and Iowa. But this week, ESPN Analytics introduced the strength of record, which is different from the BPI, and then it's the ranking of how hard it is for a team to achieve its record based on its schedule. So instead of who has the top ceiling, it's about who's deserving. The 1 seeds according to that metric, and again, many ways to look at it, but naturally I think this metric makes more sense, and so does our producer, because you got Maryland and Xavier as the ones, along with Oklahoma and Villanova. A pair of Big East teams both in action tonight. And
So what Mr. Van Pelt was saying was, you know, here are these things, here are these fancy new stats. The same question applies. The last one. BPI and strength of record are the two stats.
I feel like I'm biased. I can't really give an answer.
Well, there's an interesting question, right? Like the bias is in favor of
Right.
I mean, are we
Yeah.
rooting for these things to be analytics? Like, what's the?
Yeah, I mean, I know what went into it, all the back end analysis.
But like, not to interrupt you,
Yeah.
Aaron, but there's an interesting thing where, like, I think there's a virtue in, like, analytics is a synonym we're suggesting for like quality and work, and there is like a depth, right? That seems to be where we're going.
And with this, what's important about it is before you answer, you have to ask the right question before you can answer it. So we found with basketball, there's 2 separate questions you're asking. Who's the best team and who's the most deserving? And with that, we tried to answer the question the best way we could with all different analytics. We have data going back, really deep analysis and data. So, I mean, obviously I'd say analytics, but.
I'm unbiased, right? But I love this type of stuff because I use it in my own work. And I do think that this is analytics because you're not only putting the data in context, but you're doing so in a way that answers a lot of questions almost at once, right? We just spoke about a couple of those. And who's the best team is not always the most deserving and vice versa. And it's okay for those 2 things not always to be the same, right? We talk a lot about, I think that's also one of the misconceptions about analytics is that a lot of people, I think, that rage against it are upset at the perception that we, meaning us as the royal we, right, are trying to definitively answer a question, right? Who is the best baseball player of all time? Or who does this the best? Or who's the most whatever? And that is so untrue because all we want to do is just find out what we don't know, right? That's what analytics tries to do. It tries to figure out what is it that we don't know, and A, do we have the data to know it? Or B, you know, what do we need to do to learn it? And then finally, how important is it, right? How important is it if a basketball player is clutch in the last 5 minutes, right? It may not impact win percentage as much as we think, or if you have an offensive lineman that can run a 4.40, right? What does that mean to the team in general? And I think the biggest misconception, at least that I get, is that I'm trying to end the debate with a number, with a decimal point, and that's it, and that's the end. And that's really the furthest thing from the truth. We're just trying to find out what we don't know and educate ourselves, and by our role is educate other people through the process in a way that's fun, informative, and it doesn't make you want to hang yourself from math. I mean, that's the whole thing, right?
Yeah, it's for some reason when you use a number for something, it changes the way people view things, and it does tend to shut down debate, right? If you had said last week, the Lakers are very unlikely to beat the Warriors, but you never know, and after a weekend night in LA, right, could be a letdown game. You can also have a model that says I think we had the Warriors as a 95% favorite, and that seems so much more precise. Like, how could the 5% underdog win? Well, in basketball, because you have a large sample, you can go and say, well, literally we can find 1,000 games like this, and the underdog won 50 times. So, you don't always have that luxury in politics. It's a discussion for tomorrow or something, maybe. But I am really interested in measures like BPI, strength of record. We also have a college football model where we take FPI, but then try and predict how humans will react to things on top of it, which is kind of a fascinating exercise. Because part of it is calling people out on inconsistency, right? It's saying, if you really did a blind resume test and you say, you know what, I don't care about margin of victory, that I care only about wins and losses and strength of schedule, that's fine, but if you try and actually turn that into something more objective and consistent, maybe you'll find that that you're not being very consistent, that you're overlooking a bad loss for Kentucky or something, but giving Gonzaga a lot of shit about it when it has to do with more subjective factors. So I think it's useful to try and have some greater level of precision and specificity and consistency. And I think people get angry sometimes if you call people out on. It's going to sound bad, but I think a lot of the reason people get angry.
It's going to sound great.
Nate already cursed, I think. Did you guys catch that?
Right. Yeah, let the record reflect that Nate cursed before me. Could someone write that down?
I just didn't know we could do that. I'm going to start doing that.
But it's the people who get really mad at analytics are people who are lazy, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
People who want to be able to make an argument without having to go through and have the burden of actually proving or demonstrating that argument. People who want to defer to authority and want to be takey without, analytics gets lots of things wrong, both for reasons of probabilism and because sometimes your model is wrong. Sometimes expertise really does matter. But people who get really mad at people doing analysis are people who are lazy, and their right to be a lazy pundit is called into question.
And they also, I think, are selective because they'll look at a 75% chance as a 100% chance and then say, well, see, this got it wrong because you said that XYZ team was going to win.
51% chance,
right?
100% of the time.
Yeah, right. So, but that's another layer of it too, right? I mean, I think a lot of what we do isn't absolute, right? It's not black and white. There's a huge gray area in terms of probability that we assign to games. I know that's what you guys do when you're looking at the different factors that go into a game. But for the hater, right? I mean, I don't know what other word to call it, but for those type of people that aren't as analytically inclined, they will seize on that in a second to jump on it and say, see, you were wrong, you said that so-and-so will win. But, a 30% chance is a large amount, right? Even 5% chances happen all the time. It's not that it's unbelievably crazy to see a 5% upset. And, especially with the tournament, the March Madness tournament coming in, we're going to see a bunch of upsets. But people will still look at it as a well, you said so-and-so will win or not, when in essence, we're actually giving the underdog a chance. Maybe it's not as high a chance as they think. But in reality, it's something that we should see, at least in our lifetime, over a significant period of time.
This year's tournament, by the way, with there being a lot of parity, it might be that the top team in our model, I don't know, it's going to be Michigan State or something, has a 12% chance of winning. It might be somewhere around there. It's been as low as 19%
That's nothing.
in the past. And so that means, 8 out of 9 times, MSU is not going to win the tournament. And yet I'm sure if our headline in our article, and this is part of our responsibility to be careful about it, but might be like, MSU's the front runner.
Favorite,
But,
yeah.
Right.
Can I get to my poster?
We got props.
So I get this question a lot, what is analytics? And I can't necessarily describe it, but
like a Chip
I'll show
Kelly
you guys.
played-
I'll show you. Yeah, no, that was modeled after, well, not the Oregon Chip Kelly. So basically,
He
I
worked really
think-
hard on this. You may want to clap while he's showing.
No,
us.
I don't need I don't need that. So I think
Clap for Alex!
strength of record, most VPI, obviously, you know, again, biased, very biased, but we think that that's answering a very legitimate question and splitting a question up well, like Sharon said. And down here, Nate, we have this SPI World Cup stuff that our groups worked on together, and I think that's answering a really interesting question: who's going to win the World Cup, and how do their odds change?
And my chart didn't make the cut. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. This is
That's not me,
self-promotion.
that's cool. Oh,
Self-promotion.
yeah, that's cool.
This is code, so I think code is an important part of analytics, not essential, but I think it's an overlooked part. You like that?
That seems so smart.
Yeah.
Nerd alert.
And then why is Reese Davis on the poster? Oh, because we love Reese Davis.
Because Reese is the best.
So this is my photo definition of analytics.
Sweet.
I had a not analytics poster, but it was not approved. Come see me afterwards if you want to see it.
Was it Jeff Van Gundy's face and just flowers? Like,
No, but Barkley, yes.
oh, cool.
This panel has been the most thoughtful response to a tweet I often get, which is, "Can you even throw a spiral?"
No.
Like, no,
Hell no.
check out these insights I have. Anyway, so we're going to run through real quick some slides, and I think, let's see if we can get to them. But we talked about win probability. Let's just talk about that as we get into the final stretch run of our thing. Right. So analytics is context. We'll hit these one at a time. So maybe one of you guys want to take this. But valuable. I mean, this is one of those things where people love to rail against this as when improbable things happen is like
Yeah, I
proof
think
that you were never right in the first place.
I mean, this is an in-game probability chart, right?
Yes.
So this is hugely valuable to tell a story because you can explain that a team made a comeback, right? But this just visually tells you what odds they surmounted to do that, right? There's different levels of comeback. There could be a couple points, or there could be a 30-point, or what have you. So, I mean, this to me, we can debate whether it's analytics or not. I don't think it is, but it's a critical part of at least my storytelling process because, you know, some people can read stuff and learn. Some people are visual learners, and this really helps satisfy both of those things because I live in the written word, but being able to show graphically what happened, it's a little bit easier to digest of how significant was it that what we saw, right? I mean, that to me is hugely valuable. So I'm a big fan of the in-game win probability stuff. I think it's a great addition, and you know, I don't get why people are so upset about it, but for me, I mean, it definitely is a tool that I use in storytelling all the time. So thank you, ESPN.
I mean, it's, first of all, there are a couple things going on here. One is that having a visualization, I think, is often a very effective way in between words and code. I mean, you know, the analytics really is often in the code, right? It's in someone saying, I'm collecting data and I'm kind of a reporter or a data scientist, whatever you want to call it, an analyst, and I'm collecting information and trying to solve this question. I do think ways that show your work a little bit, because you probably can't show someone code. Even 538's very nerdy audience doesn't want to see code usually. You can put it on GitHub or something. But giving people a sense for, here's a scatter plot, or a sense for here's a branch in the diagram where you show, when we say, oh, Michigan State has a 12% probability of winning despite being the best team in the country. I'm from East Lansing, I'm biased, right? Here are the stages where they might lose. 97% chance to win their first round against North Carolina AT&T, but then you have problems and so forth. So showing that work, I think, is a really, really important part of it. And win probability is interesting. I think, you know, some sports win probability is simpler than others. I mean, basketball is structurally a lot simpler from a win probability standpoint than football. You know, one thing I've seen some people do is they'll start to show multiple models within a chart and saying we have 5 different levels of complexity for a win probability model in the NFL, and you show how those lines move with you, and it kind of shows maybe, so when you get to like end game situations, the number of timeouts can be a big factor that's unimportant ordinarily, or things like that, or the quality of the quarterback. And so showing your assumptions, I think, can be useful too. But basically, charts are an incredibly useful tool that I'm not sure if a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I think someone had to determine this was like 720 words or something like that.
Of course Nate knows that, right? I mean, like no one else would know that but Nate.
Took analytics to get there, probably.
This is why Jeff Van Gundy hates us. All right, next one. Analytics as myth busting, right? So the challenging of conventional wisdom around fourth down calls or jump shooting. Can jump shooting teams win championships?
This is my favorite. Is that bad to say?
Because it's combative.
Yeah, I like to mix it up. But for me, like this is where this is low-hanging fruit, right? When you have someone like when you have teams, NFL fans say that the Patriots don't use analytics, right? But Belichick won a Lifetime Achievement Award from here for his work in analytics, right? I mean, it's that type of stuff that for me, I like because it's low-hanging fruit, and it provides probably the most, I'll say interaction, but the feedback is not always positive, but it does provide the most interaction, and from being with a newspaper, they like that, right? That equates to comments and page views and tweets and all that other stuff. So for me, when someone says something, we'll say silly, like Jeff Van Gundy or Charles Barkley, then it provides an opportunity to really educate. And the funny thing about Charles Barkley is, from an analytics perspective, and your site did a great job on this, he's a lot better than people probably give him credit for when you look at the advanced analytics for that. So
As was Joe Morgan,
yeah,
as I'm sure Goose
right?
Gossage,
So, like,
all
it's
David
kinda,
Price, all
It's
of them.
kind of ironic that the people that are railing against it the most and the most visually would have had a lot to gain, probably financially, but also in terms of accolades had it been around back in the day. So yeah, this is my favorite part.
Yeah, it's fun to write about too, and like you said, you get people engaged, people get really passionate about it. It could even be the simplest myth, like a team's 12-0, but they might not actually be that good.
Right.
Looking at how they won the games, who they played to win the 12 games, where they played those games. It could be the simplest thing that once you dig into the data and you look at the small details, you come out with a pretty interesting conclusion.
Yeah, I've always been a little confrontational myself.
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
And I kind of thought this was just like two different things, like my analytical side and my confrontational side, but they're really all part of the same thing, I think, because it is saying, I'm questioning the received wisdom. I mean, in politics, I'd say the conventional wisdom is wrong like almost half the time. I'd say if you read a statement made on kind of a Sunday morning talk show, not a statement of fact, not a statement that, oh, Donald Trump's ahead in the polls of Florida, but a statement of analysis or implication, I think that's wrong like almost half the time. And so if you get to the point where you're like, boy, half the things that I read in the newspaper basically are wrong, I mean, that's going to throw you for a real loop. Sometimes the analytics are going to be wrong also. In sports, I think it's actually way better than 55%. For one thing, because sports is taking place, you have such a larger sample size that sometimes, and it's such a competitive environment, that sometimes the conventional wisdom is pretty good. And the heuristics that teams and GMs and players develop after repeated trial and error, after dozens and dozens of years, can be very good and hard to beat. And it's kind of more market tested in a way than political conventional wisdom, I think, which is made in a low sample size environment by a very small group of people. But still, being willing to question authority and say, you at the very least have to prove this to me, I think is a core part of skepticism. And I think skepticism is a core part of analytics.
Just quick on myth busting. I think it's not just to bust myths. It's not like, oh, here's analytics so we can bust myths always, or all myths. We're not like trying to bust every single myth. It's just, it is to serve fans.
Myths that are true.
Yeah.
Not
right.
You guys get it.
Yeah, good point. Terminology that I'm not as good at. Yeah, so
no,
we're not just trying to bust the conventional wisdom, I think is probably a better term.
Yeah.
But like verifying it, in some cases, yeah, a lot of stuff you find is true, but there's some interesting things, and that's where analytics will add value to serve fans, right? So that's what we're
And there are these weird cases where, like, take Draymond Green, another Michigan State Spartan.
Sure.
Right? He's a guy where maybe 10 years ago, analytics might be saying, oh, this guy's overrated, to be honest, right? And now that we can kind of measure a little bit, measure a lot better defense and the value of floor spacing and stuff like that. We're like,
how he affects his
this
teammates.
guy's really, really good.
It's like a top 10 type of player.
So sometimes analytics kind of confirms the conventional wisdom or the received wisdom of scouts and people who follow the sport a lot. You've seen that in baseball and basketball, maybe a little bit less in football.
And the conventional wisdom being wrong so often is what provides the value of analytics, right? In the Moneyball reunion, Paul DePodesta said that they were happy to get one player out of 50 rounds of the baseball draft, and Billy Beane said, well, what if we can get two, right? I mean, we're talking about one extra player out of the other 49 rounds of the draft, and that is a huge win, right? It doesn't have to be that you have to get 80%. Now, the conventional wisdom might be that you have to do really, really well in the baseball draft in order to generate long-term potential, but it really is just finding one extra player, one extra major leaguer player a year to provide that value. So being able to look at that conventional wisdom in one, seeing if it's true or false, but then also start asking questions, well, what could we do to get that extra advantage, right? There's that book, Extra 5%, or whatever, however you want to term it. You know, being able to look at the conventional wisdom and sussing out just how effective or true it is can lead to some tremendous value down the road.
Right, market advantages.
Right,
and
absolutely.
so forth. All right, moving to the end before we get to some questions. Analytics as insight, the unique, like what has analytics provided that we have not otherwise been exposed to, whether that's visualizations or otherwise? I think we're all pro insight. Let's move on to the next slide. And then we'll get into some questions. It's freelancing.
This is called riffing in the business.
Yeah. There we go.
How's everybody doing?
Yes. Please tell me this works.
There's something about analytics. However, your analytics can change over the course of a year by how you play different people and how guys improve. So the improvement of your team also dictates your analytics. When I first came into the NBA, my first 5 years in the league, I took 82 threes. In 5 years, I only took 82 three-point shots. After that, after the fifth year, I took 82 in probably 40 games when I got to the Rockets. It was because of what it is. But if you looked at my analytics, you said, well, this guy's not a three-point shooter. But I became a three-point shooter because I had a big beast mode in the middle that drove two men. So I'm like, okay, I'll stand out here and start shooting threes. So that's why analytics don't work. That's why analytics don't work at all.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think
I love that conversation for so many reasons.
It's so great.
One of which is that people at home will watch that and just kind of nod along and not actually parse what the substance and the meaning of what Kenny, who I love, is saying, right? Like,
yeah,
what is?
I think like it's not his fault. Like they're actually getting presented stats and analytics as the same, so they think they're the same. They're like, in my day, we just called these stats. And what actually is, it's like ironic, is like the analytics would probably show with his three-pointers how they would have evolved with playing with a bigger player, and like your three-point percentage, the analytics would show is likely to improve. The stats would not say that because that was how many three-pointers he shot. So analytics would add value and help explain what he was explaining, but the language is a barrier.
And there's a mainstream concern, right? Like when we get to how do we make this accessible, where that is a thing that seems more intuitively off.
Well, I mean, there is a hypothesis here, which is, can a guy develop a three-point shot in mid-career? I think the answer is actually sometimes they can. Larry Bird did not shoot a lot of three-pointers early in his career, and then, of course, came one of the most prolific ones ever. But these are questions that, I mean, players of all people should be deeply interested in this stuff. They have millions of dollars of money on the line. Yeah. You know, Kevin Durant is looking at his analytics, and LeBron James is clearly making very smart adjustments to how he plays over the course of his career.
Steph Curry does too, I thought. Coach.
The guys who are not lazy are looking at everything, every piece of data they can get their hands on to improve their performance.
And why wouldn't you? I mean, think about how much money is at stake, right? If you become a better player, especially in the NBA, you make a lot of money, right? I mean, if you're a quarterback that's just average, right, you make a lot of money. So any tool that you can have at your disposal that can help you in that regard, I mean, I wish there was journalism fancy stuff. I'd be rich, right? I mean, it'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. It's analytics can only help you help your career. So with Kenny, like, the reason why he shot more three-pointers was because he had the behemoth, and analytics would tell you that.
Someone said to him, hey, this is a good idea, right?
Yeah.
I mean, same thing happens in all sports.
Other analysts will criticize the stats because they don't account for who you played or what context. That's actually what analytics is designed to do, is you're actually trying to account for that context, taking a stat and making it a little more context neutral.
One of the things I think about when it comes to what are the obstacles in front of the mainstream kind of understanding that I think we're all going for, and one of the things I think about is just the gulf. Like we say in sports, we care about process, but we just care about results, right? Like the Monday morning quarterbacking of a coach's call, right? Like whether it worked or not determines how much we scrutinize,
right,
and not even just whether it's right, whether we care to ask, was this even right?
True.
Is that the gulf? I mean, is process results, is that the fundamental thing, or is there something deeper anti-mathness to it? I mean, what is the actual
It's very hard
spiritual
to persuade
understanding?
people that focusing on process gets you better results in any line of work, really. And people who are really passionate about anything, whether it's art or building a new kind of car or anything else, they tend to be very process driven, and that kind of what makes, I think, creative people different from other types of people. But there's no doubt that whenever we have a projection saying something is 70-30, we're always rooting for the front runners because we know that the 70 is so much easier to explain, even though technically we're more right if that 30% happens
3 out of
sometimes.
10, yeah.
In politics, you kind of never get to the long run, but in sports you do. If you have a model and every time the 95% favorite won, 1,000 out of 1,001 times or something, then you probably built the model wrong, actually.
You're underconfident. Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've written, this team has a 55% chance to win, which means they have a 45% chance to lose. And you kind of have to put that in there, or else everybody sees it as black or white. Either you're right or you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for me writing for a newspaper because most of my stuff's online, but they do pull some of it for the print edition, which has a much different audience than you do online. So being able to turn a lot of the process into English that explains some of the results is a challenge, and sometimes that's easier than other times. But like you said, I mean, you do sometimes have to explain it in that way, right? 55% chance mean they can win equals a 45% chance that they can lose. So if they lose, don't email me and call me names because that's not nice, right?
Right. As every political debate we've seen has suggested, maybe we sometimes underestimate the value of communicating in the lowest common denominator. So there is a value to reaching a certain
Well,
audience.
there are ways to, you had a couple of slides with interactives. Sometimes you can try and do both at once. You can have an interactive where the kind of top-level view, it's some chart or something, gives you basically the right impression. Then if you click on that, you can go a little bit deeper. Maybe you have a slider where you can change the assumptions and see how robust it is. Again, kind of showing the work, but ideally you want to have something that's reaching multiple audiences at once.
Right. All right, speaking of reaching audiences, we have some questions from the vast sea of people. Okay, we have time for one question. There is a live updated line in this Google Doc. One, yes? Two. I just bargained for two.
Nice
All right.
negotiation.
Oh man, I didn't even read these.
This is
A lot
awkward.
of
Just
curse
raise your
words.
hand.
A lot of curse words here. Also, the ESPN has an analytics vertical, espn.com/analytics. Shout out to Walt Disney.
Washington Post does too.
Neil, how important is transparency when it comes to analytics? This is the question. Especially, should algorithms and data sets be made open?
I think it's helpful to know what goes into it, but I understand the need to keep the secret sauce, right? I mean, someone works a lot of hours, puts a lot of time and energy into it, and they want to protect it. But I do think the real value, though, is sharing it with as much people, because you get input to make it better, right? I mean, or you can find some limitations. So I get both sides, but I do think there's a tremendous amount of value for at least getting some sort of input at some level to help it along.
No, transparency, I think, is very important. It's kind of very important to the scientific method, and it's important to showing your work and being able to prove your work. You know, I'm not saying every time you have to post raw data and code. It is very painstaking to build stuff, but you know, frankly, we at least disclose enough information that someone could reverse engineer something. Right. Sometimes we do literally post the code and the data. So for us, it's like, you know, on the transparency side, it's between a 7 and a 10, depending on the circumstances. And we'll defend when we are on the 7 instead of the 10 side. But again, compare this to at least political journalism, where you know, people should be publishing their transcripts and their raw conversations. And the transparency scale there is between like a 0 and a 3. So, you know, it's a very important part of what we do.
I agree it's important, but the question, with ESPN, we struggle with, so we want to be transparent and tell you all about the models, but that's for like the top 1% or even smaller that actually care about that. The average fan just wants to know, will their team win? So it's kind of a balancing act between getting to the average fan and all the people at this conference. But it's definitely important, I agree.
I think in TV we lose, like, digitally these guys are all like excellent, and you have space a little bit. Like a lot of times we work in TV, there's like no room for time to explain the model. Like, hell no.
It is easier in mediums where you have an infinite amount of space, or people can click on things and go deeper.
Interactives, yeah.
That becomes a lot. But you know, at least if you're not able to do that, at least showing a couple of different ways to look at a problem and saying, actually, we have 3 different models, and here's what they say. They're a little bit different. If it's strength of record versus strength of schedule, whatever else. Yeah. Like that at least kind of goes and shows people we're not treating the model as like some godlike entity.
Right.
We have tools. A lot of tools are at our disposal, and if they all point in the same direction, that's pretty powerful. If they differ, then there might be a lot of structural uncertainty in the problem. But TV is a challenging medium for transparency and analytics.
Speaking of finite amounts of time, and in the interest of transparency, I don't like these questions, so we're done. We're good. Thank you for coming, Alec, Neil, Nate, Sharon. Round of applause for that.